This video is sponsored by Opera GX, the internet browser designed with gamers and streamers in mind. Opera GX is streamlined to provide the best online experience and has tons of features that make my life easier while streaming, writing, and researching. The GX control features help enhance my PC's performance while I'm gaming with my browser open, and it allows me to customize how much CPU, RAM, and network bandwidth Opera GX uses. The sidebar feature gives me easy access to social media platforms, which makes connecting with my audience as easy as a click of a button. And the GX player integrates music streaming apps like Spotify directly into my browser, and pauses my music whenever I start video or audio in a browser tab. It also has an integrated ad blocker, a VPN, and a mobile app that directly connects to the PC version. You can gain access to all these features and more by downloading Opera GX on your PC and mobile phone for free, using the link in the description below. The Devil May Cry series is composed of a relatively small cast, yet this cast of characters is multiplied greatly when you consider the many facets they've taken on over the years, the many copies and clones that have appeared in every game. The number of characters who don't have an alternative self are almost negligible. All the main characters have at least one, typically more. It's become a major feature of the series, the focus upon twins, copies, and shadow selves. They all come together and return to one major theme: the doppelganger. The concept of a physical copy of yourself who acts against your own interests. The series takes the concept and turns it into the cornerstone of the plotline, the conflict between the self and the shadow. Drawing from sources that include gothic literature from Europe and ghost stories from Japan, the Devil May Cry series creates a fascinating narrative about facing yourself in the mirror and coming to terms with what you find. Doppelganger is a German word meaning literally double walker, and it refers to a look-alike of a person, a physical copy, which became a major trope in fiction. The term was first coined by a writer in 1796, and it was eventually adopted by various European writers, especially in the gothic genre. The idea of another self, often an evil or violent self, lent itself well to the psychological and intensely dark elements of gothic fiction, and it was explored thematically with twins, alter egos, physical doubles, and mental projections, and it often focused upon the tragedy of being destroyed by your opposite, by your own self. As Western ideas traveled eastward and made their way to Japan, they were reinterpreted and added to the traditions of Japanese culture. This included the doppelganger concept, which arrived in Japan in the 20th century alongside translations of German, French, English, and other Western novels. These stories introduced a new perspective on the concept of the double that Japan had yet to heavily explore. Physical copies in fiction and folktale were not explored psychologically, but instead as ghost stories and fairy tales. Before the modern era, the copy in Japan existed as an event related to the supernatural, either a creature posing as a person, a yokai, particularly the fox, the cat, and the badger, or as a spiritual event, known as rikonbyo. In an old Japanese folktale, a young man comes home to find his wife sitting next to a woman who is her identical twin. Shocked, the man exclaims in surprise, asking if his wife has suffered from rikonbyo, the soul-splitting sickness, an illness of the spirit that led to a piece of a person's soul splitting off into its own body. It is revealed that a fox became a copy of his wife in an attempt to trick him, and he drives the fox away. This story mentions both of the early Japanese doppelganger-like concepts. Either a magical trickster is playing a prank on you, or a spiritual sickness has split your soul, and you need healing or enlightenment. These were not stories about human nature or psychology. They were folk tales meant to entertain and to teach Buddhist morals to the populace. The symbol used to represent the soul in the word Rekonbyo is the Chinese symbol for Hun, the heavenly soul. In Chinese tradition, there are two pieces of the soul. So long as one is alive, they are blended together, like a running river. When the person dies, the soul settles and the pieces separate. The Po, or earthly soul, falls to the earth, while the Hun rises to the heavens. If the right rituals and rites are observed and the person is at peace, the Hun becomes an honored ancestor who watches over their descendants, while the Po rests peacefully in the earth. In Japanese, the symbol for Hun is read as Tama, and is the term for the soul of a living person. Once the person has died, their soul is referred to as Reikon or Mitama, and much like the Chinese, the Japanese soul was seen as having multiple parts or pieces, which functioned together while the person was alive. These pieces, however, could function separately, such as during the Rekonbyo, when one piece of a person's soul was split off due to illness. The Japanese concept is called Ichirei Shikon, the idea that there is a singular human spirit made of 4 souls, which each have their own major function: the Saki Mitama, the Kushi Mitama, the Nigi Mitama, and the Ara Mitama. These 4 pieces were of the most concern after a spirit's death, for in the case of kami and the enshrined spirits of Shinto, these pieces could represent the faces of a kami spirit, and their behavior towards a village populace. In mythology, gods in one story may be benevolent, and in another may be selfish and vengeful. In Japan, this change is explained as being the different mitamas of the same spirit. The Ara Mitama is the warlike spirit, useful during disasters and wartime, but dangerous during peace. The Saki Mitama is the soul of love and prosperity, seen as the bringer of the harvest. The Kushi Mitama is the wisdom soul, associated with magic, transformation, and curing illness. And the Nigi Mitama is the peaceful, harmonious soul, the normal state of the kami spirit during times of peace. Most often, the Nigi Mitama and the Ara Mitama, the peaceful and the warlike souls, are the main focus in Shinto tradition, with the other spirits seen as subsets of the Nigi Mitama. These souls are seen splitting off from major god figures in myths. In the Nihon Shoki, the god Oku Kinushi meets his Mitama in the form of the kami Omon non Nushi. Though he does not recognize him, the spirit appears to help him at a major moment of uncertainty and is eventually enshrined as a deity himself. When the doppelganger concept came to Japanese shores, it would become heavily associated with the idea of Rekonbyo, the soul-splitting illness. The similarities are clear. Both are about the existence of another self, but the Japanese explanation connects it to spirituality. Western ideas of the doppelganger were far more mentally and scientifically focused, on ideas of psychology and modern science. The Japanese doppelganger was a spiritual event, meant as a lesson in much the same way the fairy tales of old were meant to teach morals of the Buddha and the beliefs of Japanese Buddhist schools. It is not limited to storytelling, however. Some embrace it as a real phenomenon. This Japanese site seems to be about a specialist who treats soul sickness, which is said to come from a lack of sleep, and involves feelings of disassociation and the sensation of something pulling on your mind. A blog site describes it as a visitor from the spirit realm, who appears at a turning point in your life as a message of change. These sites reflect the general Japanese attitude towards the idea of the doppelganger. It is a spiritual split, not a mental or psychological one. Modern Japanese fiction, especially manga and anime, have developed a modern exploration of the doppelganger. Nearly every major series involves the trope in some form. Naruto and Bleach involve secondary selves and multiple souls. Yu-Gi-Oh! And Inuyasha involve reincarnations and doubles. Trigun and Trinity Blood involve siblings and twins who are dramatically opposed. Very few anime have no examples whatsoever of the concept, and video games like Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy also have many examples. The Devil May Cry series follows these traditions, starting with the very first game, released in 2001. In the first Devil May Cry, we find ourselves facing an enemy who looks exactly like our main character, born from his reflection in a mirror. At first, it appears to be a strange, unique demon, a rival to Dante, whose ability to look exactly like the man is not explained, nor is his existence in a mirror world. Fighting him 3 times reveals his face, which is remarkably like Dante's, and his final defeat triggers a flashback, revealing his true identity: Vergil, Dante's twin brother. In the creation of the first Devil May Cry game, the development team focused on the architecture and design of British and Spanish castles. Other influences become clear when you examine the artwork found in the game, including the French Palace of Versailles, whose art is strewn throughout nearly every level. When you examine the bedrooms found in Versailles, the similarities to the bedroom where Vergil first appears is clear, especially the large mirror taking up a wall of the room. Mirrors are the heart and soul of Japanese spirituality. From its most ancient history, the nation has revered the image of a reflected surface, and one of the most sacred Shinto treasures is a sacred mirror, said to have been a gift to the emperor from the goddess Amaterasu. That same mirror lured her out of her self-imposed isolation when it was hung from a tree, and hanging mirrors in such a way was a part of Shinto ritual in those ancient days. And mirrors in general are believed to be connected to the soul of their possessor, that by gazing into the mirror, you are imparting it with a piece of your soul. The choice to focus so heavily upon the mirror and use it as a focal point to develop a mirror world is an obvious one. For the Japanese creative trying to explore themes of identity, there is no escaping the symbolism and spiritual import given to the mirror. Dante's first view of his long-lost and imprisoned brother, his twin and doppelganger, is in a mirror reflection, appearing as a mirage of his self. He is not just seeing a reflection, and he is not seeing a demon that mimics his reflection. He is unknowingly seeing his own brother, a piece of his soul that's been imparted to the mirror. In order to use the mirror while continuing to follow the typical design of these European castles and palaces, the scene is set in the castle bedroom. It's an intriguing and perhaps incidental connection to another major influence on the series, the themes of Gothic literature and architecture. Given the often sexual and invasive themes of Gothic literature, the bedroom is a common location in these novels, typically as a place in which peaceful sleep is interrupted by the threat, real or imagined, of something otherworldly. The bedroom is a place of vulnerability, the weak spot in which the monster takes advantage of humanity's lowered guard to strike. Dante's guard is quite lowered here. He loses his first fight with Nilo Angelo, unknowingly leaving himself vulnerable to the attacks of the monster, playing, in a sense, the Gothic hero or heroine who, in the safety of their bedroom, does not realize the danger that is to come. Vergil as Nilo Angelo is not the only doppelganger of a member of Dante's family. Trish, too, is a doppelganger, a demonic clone of Dante's mother. They are the only humanoid members of the cast besides Dante, both of them forced by threat of violence to work for Mundus. Devil May Cry 1 presents us with a hero whose goal is to avenge his family. He says so upon meeting Trish. We then see him recognizing the similar appearance of Trish to his mother. Later, he suffers greatly at her betrayal, and when she defends him and appears to be dead, he is brought to tears, forced by proxy to suffer once again the death of a mother who died protecting him. These doppelgangers are copies of people Dante has lost, in the control of the demon who took them from him. They represent Dante's worst fears and his worst memory, his inability to protect others, and the suffering his loved ones underwent because of this failure. Vergil appears as his reflection in a mirror, yet Dante does not recognize his own twin. Through combat, he comes to respect Angelo, but still does not suspect his real identity. The necklace reveals the truth. The very same amulet that Vergil snatched from his brother in 3 and fell into hell with, the symbol of their broken bond. Mundus has destroyed their relationship, to the point that Dante does not recognize his own face in the mirror. His own soul is obscured to him. Facing the doppelganger, the shadow self, is to face your own weaknesses. In facing Vergil, in coming to recognize his true identity, in facing Trish and her betrayal, and her death protecting him, Dante faces the reality of his loss. Dante has been running from his past, seeking vengeance while avoiding the face in the mirror. In Devil May Cry, he finally faces his own reflection, overcomes his shadow, his fear of loss and the pain of his memories, and becomes capable of defeating the one who created those fears in the first place. In Devil May Cry 2, Dante's not the center of the story. It's Lucia's story, and the main conflict comes from her identity as a failed clone. She is the doppelganger, and it's the recognition of this fact, that she was not born but created, that informs her character. Arius, the antagonist, created her, and others like her, but she was tossed aside as a failure. Lucia was not destroyed like the other failures. She was rescued and raised by Mathieu, whose name is similar to materia, the Latin for material. The word was used in alchemical traditions to refer to the primal creative material that was the source of the universe, the prima materia. The most heartfelt moment of the game comes when Mathieu acknowledges Lucia, saying that she and her daughter may not share blood, but that doesn't invalidate their bond. They're still family. Lucia comes to recognize her origins do not define her, and she further manages to avenge herself and her cloned sisters by defeating Arius. Like Dante in the first game, she kills the source of her own fears, conquering the shadow self by killing Arius. Twins are a rarity in Japanese culture. Studies seem to suggest they're born more rarely in Japan. And since ancient history into the modern 20th century, the birth of twins was believed to be terribly bad luck. In spite of that fact, the mythic creators of the islands of Japan are twins, Izanagi and Izanami, brother and sister born together, becoming husband and wife, producing the islands and all life upon them. Their story ends in conflict and permanent separation, with the wife sealed in hell forever. A second pair of twins appears in the ancient tales of Japan, the twin sons of the emperor, Oso no Mikoto and Woso no Mikoto. The elder, Oso, was misbehaving, and the emperor requested that Woso reprimand his twin. In response, Woso butchered him. The emperor, horrified, sent the prince off to fight in wars in the hopes he would eventually die. Instead, he earned a legendary reputation and a new name, Yamato Takeru. There aren't many tales of twins in Japan before the modern age. The closest comparison is once again found in ghost stories, such as the folktale of a young man whose lover dies, only for him to later find her near-identical twin. It's revealed the twin is the girl's sister, being possessed by the ghost of the dead girl. A few variations on this story appear in various folktales, but none of them are truly about twins. Stories focused on twins did not really develop until the import of Western tales about the doppelganger, and the interest in such tales drove the Japanese storytellers to invent their own, and stories about twins became commonplace. Anime and manga are once again major examples. The concept appears throughout the genres, often in the same vaguely incestuous, tragic way that the story of Izanagi and Izanami appeared in ancient myths. Devil May Cry 3 is a prequel, centered upon the past conflict between two twin brothers. Our first perspective of this conflict is of a battle in the rain, which has removed the superficial differences between them. With Vergil's hair fallen round his face, he is an exact double of his brother. The clothes may be different, but the souls are the same. Dante and Vergil are each other's shadows. They're doppelgangers, a fact that is touched upon in interviews and behind-the-scenes information shared by members of the team. The brothers both represent what the other fears the most. Dante, the brother who remained behind and watched his mother die, fears being a burden on others. He fears caring for people, because people he loves die. In Vergil, he has a brother he's already lost, once as a child and now for a second time, because Vergil seemingly no longer cares for him. Dante fears being like the monsters that killed their family, and in Vergil he sees a version of himself overcome by the demonic, caring only for power. In Dante, Vergil sees his own worst fears, a version of himself that is weak and human, incapable of protecting himself. Vergil feels abandoned by his family and so abandons Dante in turn. He fears his family never cared for him, and in Dante sees someone who professes verbally not to care about Vergil or their shared father. Yet in the end, Dante manages to defeat him, creating the possibility that all the terrible things Vergil has done, everything he suffered was for nothing, and that what he tossed aside had more value than he understood. Each brother casts a long shadow over the other, and it is this shadow that distorts their relationship and keeps them at odds. Famous stories of doppelgangers inevitably focus upon the damage that hurting one's other self does to you. In William Wilson, a story by Edgar Allan Poe, a young man deals with an exact copy of himself his entire life and is driven mad by it. The story ends with him stabbing his copy, only to realize he's attacked a mirror, and in doing so has stabbed himself. To harm your double is to harm yourself, because you are the same. At the height of the Temen Negru, during their first major conflict, rain begins to fall and Vergil's hair falls as well, creating the illusion that the two brothers are exact copies. But they are the same person, each struggling with the same burden, the traumas of their lost childhoods. Each of them is hurting themselves, in the sense that their coping mechanisms are self-destructive, and in the way they attack each other. In hurting their shadows, they are stabbing themselves in the mirror. After being defeated by his brother, Dante climbs the tower once again, and faces another boss on the same field, called the Doppelganger, a shadowy form who takes on Dante's devil trigger. He is fought right where Vergil was, and appears as Dante but as a demon, just as Vergil is Dante's twin, given to their more demonic side. He has another name, translated as Death Void in English. In Japanese, he is called the Yami no Keshin, Yami meaning darkness. Keshin is a far more complex idea. In general, it means an embodiment or incarnation, but it has its origins in Buddhism. Mahayana Buddhist traditions assert that the Buddhas, the enlightened spirits of the deceased, have multiple bodies or trikaya. What these bodies are, how many there are, and what they're called can change based on the Buddhist school involved. That the body referred to here is the Nirmanakaya, called Keshin in Japan, the manifestation body of the Buddha. A Buddha is often believed to have always been enlightened, before and after birth. But in order to teach others, they manifest a physical body and become a living being, and so they appear to be alive. This Nirmanakaya is the physical body the Buddha uses to reach the world of suffering and teach others. In Devil May Cry 3, the doppelganger Dante faces at the top of the tower is the Nirmanakaya of his shadow, the manifestation of his own darkness, fought in a room called Apparition Incarnate. This darkness is here to teach him the futility of his own actions, that in harming his shadow, in harming Vergil, he is only harming himself. In the end, he does not kill this shadow. The doppelganger becomes part of him. Devil May Cry 3 shows us a young Dante who has little of the nobility of the first game's character. He's yet to find a reason to care for the world around him, in seeing Lady determined to right the wrongs of her family, in seeing his twin becoming twisted by the hunger for power. He comes to realize the dangers in not caring for the world. Regardless of his past, he has to take an interest in his future, or he and everyone around him may not have one. In accepting that he does care about the world, he accepts that he cares about Vergil. It's never said aloud, but the implication is clear in how Dante's behavior changes. He shifts from rude and dismissive about Vergil and his goals, to concern about those goals and how Vergil plans to reach them. "What do you need all that power for?" he asks his brother, trying to get Vergil to think more clearly about his actions. Vergil, too, has some realizations of his own. Recognizing he's been defeated multiple times by the interference of humans and the younger brother he never took seriously, he's forced to reconsider his own choices. It is again only implied, but in the final scenes with Dante, it's clear his opinion of his brother has changed. He is no longer the man that sneered at his brother and left him for dead on top of the tower. Instead, he encourages Dante to flee, and keeps him from following Vergil into hell. Devil May Cry 4 sees an interesting twist on the theme of doubles and opposites in the series. It is the first game not to immediately feature Dante as the protagonist. Instead, we find ourselves in the shoes of his lookalike, Nero, whose personality and appearance are in many ways similar to Dante. The irreverence is more subtle, and the flirtation almost non-existent, but overall their physical appearance and backgrounds are mirrors of one another, two part demons living in a human world. In previous games, Dante's doubles represented his fears about losing control, of giving in to his demonic side, of hurting humans. The opening of Devil May Cry 4 shows a Dante who does exactly that, for reasons that are left unclear for a decent portion of the game. From the perspective of our new protagonist, Dante is a dangerous, uncontrolled monster, which is exactly what Nero fears becoming. Dante has become the Vergil of Nero's story. The arm, which appears suddenly and unexpectedly, granting Nero such strange powers, represents a lack of control that Nero fears in himself. He's angry at himself and the world, and doesn't have the emotional maturity to control it. He's young, hot-headed, and afraid of what he might lose should he fail to control himself, which makes keeping control all the harder. Whenever Dante appears, his control vanishes, but instead of being punished for it or suffering for it, Nero finds understanding and patience in this strange man who looks so similar to him. This Dante may be more demonic, but he's hardly monstrous. He points out the hypocrisy of a demonic cult pretending to virtue by dressing up like angels. He fights them because of their actions, not what or who they are. Demon or human, those who kill others using demonic power are Dante's enemies. This is an older Dante who has had years to come to terms with his history and his identity, who has faced his shadow on Temen Nigru and Malad Island. He has control over his powers, which we see explicitly shown in the first fight with Nero. The boy's attack almost leads Dante's demon form to appear, but the older man forces it back. It's clear that Dante sees a lot of his younger self in Nero, because Nero has many of the problems Dante had in 3. His lack of experience and control, his anger, his smart mouth, and seeming lack of concern for the world. But unlike Dante, Nero does have a family he cares about, in Credo and Kyrie, and it's this that drives him forward. In Nero, we have a version of Dante who was allowed to grow up more normally, who didn't lose everything one horrible night in his youth. While he does suffer the temporary betrayal and eventual loss of his brother, Credo dies trying to defend him, and that knowledge, that his brother didn't abandon him for being part demon, keeps him grounded. Kyrie, too, refuses to leave him. That love and support are worlds apart from the youth Dante had, the isolation and the abandonment he felt at his brother's hands. Nero also has the good luck of having a teacher who isn't as brutal and traumatized as Vergil. Dante embraced his demonic power and achieved Devil Trigger due to the events of 3, which led him to this point, but said events were hardly pleasant. Nero's experiences with Dante are by comparison gentle. Dante never hurts Nero the way Vergil hurt him. He defends him, encourages him to think for himself, and allows him the chance to prove himself. Rather than essentially forcing his growth via more trauma and violence, Dante encourages him to chase the growth on his own, and because of it, Nero eventually becomes more comfortable with his demonic side. In many ways, Dante and Nero are opposites, doppelgangers, in the sense that they have the same history, backstory, and appearance, but they are also copies of another time, ancient history. And in this moment, Dante has become Vergil, acting as a guiding figure to the man's son. Nero, using Vergil's sword, also has a connection to the man. A demon hovers behind him while using Yamato, the shadow of Vergil hovering over him before he's ever heard the man's name. The interactions between Dante and Nero are in that shadow, but it will be years before the full effects of it are made clear. The last we see of Dante in 4 is his back as he waves to Nero, never once revealing what is hinted at but not made clear, that Dante and Nero are family. Dante tells Nero that what happens next is up to him. Nero asks if they'll meet again, clearly wanting to keep the connection, but Dante leaves his answer vague. He merely waves. He doesn't want to force his association on the kid, because Nero clearly has a life and a home already. Dante doesn't want to take that from him, doesn't want him feeling obligated to him. Instead, he leaves, unknowingly following in his brother's footsteps in a small way. Devil May Cry 3 ends with the brothers parting, with Vergil choosing to leave Dante behind, and Devil May Cry 4 ends with Dante choosing to leave Nero. Devil May Cry 5 has more clones and doppelgangers than any game in the series. Dante, Nero, and Vergil are all foils of one another, part demons whose appearances and behaviors are in many ways similar. Most of all, there is V and Urizen, the two pieces of Vergil's soul, a soul that is literally split by a sword at his own hand. V is a piece of Vergil made manifest, a demonic variation of Ricambio. V has all the personality and, of course, the humanity. He has Vergil's memories from his childhood to his nightmarish torments in the underworld. His physical body is weak, because it is not a real body, but a limited manifestation, which eventually starts to crumble. Urizen doesn't seem to have the memories that V does. He does not recognize his childhood home, nor does he seem to know Lady or Trish, both of whom Vergil has met. The only person he recognizes is Dante, and he feels an extreme amount of hatred and anger towards the man. V, meanwhile, is far more well-rounded. Urizen is one-dimensional. He is driven by the desire for the Qlipoth, for the power Vergil has always craved. V and Urizen have much in common with the Mitama of Shinto tradition. V as the balanced, harmonious Nigi Mitama, which is the normal face of the Kami. Urizen as the Ara Mitama, the angry and warlike spirit that causes destruction and chaos. It is not capable of the calmer emotions, nor is it known for containing the wisdom and love the other Mitamas possess. It is V who carries most of the lived experience within him. Urizen is only anger and violence. This split soul is a kind of illness, a manifestation of Vergil's physical and emotional trauma. After losing his family, after his failure at the tower and his painful reunion with his brother, his loss to Mundus, and years of torture at his hands, Vergil is on his last legs, and is desperate for a solution to his suffering. He sees only one before him, the removal of his weakness. His loss at Dante's and Mundus's hands implies he is weak, that he is not as strong as his opponents. If he can identify his weakness and excise it like a tumor, surely that will lead to his success and protect him from further pain. These many years, humanity has given him only sorrow and pain. He believes his mother abandoned him, that Dante chose humanity over him. that his human blood kept him from avenging his family against Mundus and becoming more like Sparta, his father. It is clear why he would see things this way, and also clear why it was an immediate mistake when the pieces of his soul split and all the rational and emotional elements go to V, and only the anger and demonic drive go to Urizen. Now we see V suffering from an ironic fear. Urizen represents Vergil's demonic powers out of control, his demon side at full, unstoppable force. All these years, Vergil has represented for Dante the demonic overcoming the human. Now, Vergil as V has to see the same scenario for himself. V has a great deal in common with Vergil: body language, interests, his style of combat, carefully observing the enemy and reacting tactically. And he shares all the memories and emotions of his predecessor. But it's quickly clear they are not the exact same person. His time outside of his Vergil self has created a new experience, a self born of Vergil living as V. This is made especially clear in the Visions of V manga, in which V's perspective on the events of the game is centered upon. Vergil as V comes to recognize the real reasons behind his suffering and mistakes, and in a powerful scene with his alternative self, tells Vergil not to repeat these mistakes, to stop fearing love and rejecting others. It is this Vergil that is reborn towards the end of Devil May Cry 5, one who has all the memories and experiences of both Urizen and V. Reunited with his brother, his only desire is to fight him again, because that has been their sole way of relating to one another since they were children. He wants his relationship with his brother back. It is only through his experience as his other selves that this realization comes to him. He sees himself clearly, standing outside himself. The other protagonists of Devil May Cry 5 don't have literal split souls, but they do have mirror images. The three silver-haired demon men are reflections of one another, and of their separate experiences as partial demons. Dante and Vergil, twins, both suffering the same childhood trauma, represent the two opposite directions that said trauma can go, the different ways it harms you and your relationships. Nero is the shadow of both these men, because he too grew up as a partial demon but never suffered the same trauma. His childhood was by comparison normal. He is well-adjusted, has friends, a healthy romantic life, and a successful career. The comparisons reveal how Vergil and Dante, still functioning as each other's doppelgangers and other selves, are determined to destroy one another out of habit. They're self-destructive. Dante appears to be alcoholic and chronically short of cash. Vergil quite literally tried to kill himself. In attacking one another, they are attacking themselves, which both of them have been doing in some form or another for years. It is the only way they know how to live, the only way they know how to communicate. It's the only way they've ever understood one another. Dante sees a brother who has always chosen violence, the sword. He chooses to protect people, knowing it puts him at odds with his brother, who has never cared for others beside himself openly. Vergil wants to fight his brother, and so doesn't try to convince Dante that he's changed in any way. He doesn't attempt to communicate at all. Dante asks for his sword in order to stop Vergil from attempting any more grand shenanigans, and Vergil takes that as their reason to fight. Nero is a doppelganger because he too is a member of the Sparta family, and one who has suffered at his family's hands. Like Dante, he has suffered significant physical trauma from Vergil. Unlike Dante, he chooses to forgive and move forward. He wants to have a family. He wants to know his father, and though he knows Vergil has committed many crimes and many mistakes, he is choosing to try and work through them rather than kill him for them. This is partially because he knows Vergil as he is now better than Dante does, because V opened up to Nero, not Dante. Before he even knew they were family, V told Nero things about Vergil's thoughts and feelings Dante has probably never heard. He relied on Nero, lowering his guard in a way Vergil never would for Dante, and he thanked him, acknowledging that he had been weak and needed the young man's help, something Vergil has never done for anyone else. Nero sees what the brothers do not, that both of them love each other. This is because he is their doppelganger, their other self, seeing the truth of them from the outside, their son and nephew, privy to their private thoughts and feelings, from the things he's seen and heard from them and others. He's the only one who can stop the two of them from destroying themselves, the only one who can unite the opposites. It is for Nero that Dante and Vergil team up again for the first time in years. The previous time was to fight Arkham, for their father's sake, to keep his power and his memory from being defaced by a madman. When they team up again, it is once again for family, for Nero, who is young and more human, making him more vulnerable to the underworld. Both Dante and Vergil have been there before, and both of them choose to go again, so Nero doesn't have to. But as Vergil says, they are able to go because Nero is here, because he is their other, the self they leave behind in the mortal world to act as Devil May Cry's hunter of demons. Nero takes on Dante's role, while Vergil and Dante leap into hell, leaving in much the same way Vergil did in 3 and Dante in 4. There's uncertainty about whether they will return or when, leaving Nero in much the same position as Dante has been for years, unsure of the fate of his family. Dante and Vergil, meanwhile, are in hell, but are for the first time working as one, no longer trapped in each other's shadows, no longer working at cross purposes. They are two parts of a singular whole, a single soul split in two, made whole once again. Devil May Cry is a series centered upon suffering people who can't see for themselves the way their behaviors are self-destructive, selfish, dangerous. Seeing their other halves, their twins, copies, and clones, makes these things clear and leads our cast of characters out of the darkness into the light.